Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back. Todd here with CFI Pro, and this week we have the sequel to part 4, hence now we have part 5, and this is going to pick up right where we left off on the solo of a pilot. So a person walks into your flight school and you're getting them ready to solo. We talked about that in 6187 and 6189. So at this particular point, our person has come into school. We have done all the endorsements needed to get them soloed, and now we actually have to get them going on their cross country. So in order to get them going on their cross country, we have to do some training with them first and make sure that they're competent, and then we can sign them off to do solo cross country. So very short video. Let's look at part 93. Let's look at part 61.93 and see what we have to do. Of course, we don't do the 91 because it's reserved, so we just skip over that one and go right to 93. So 93 states off, first off, it says, except as provided in paragraph bravo of this section, a student pilot must meet the requirements of this section before. All right, so understand that what we're about to talk about here is literally limitations that would apply to a person conducting a solo under 61.87. So in 61.87, we know that a person cannot solo unless they have an endorsement from their instructor. Actually, they need 3 of them. They need their BACN, 6187 Bravo, Charlie, and a November. And the November talks about the limitations of the student pilot being that they cannot go solo unless they have the proper endorsements, and the student pilot must be aware of that. And then lastly, we talked about 6189, which is all the limitations of a student pilot while they're conducting solo flight. And there are the 8 limitations that deal with a student pilot who is not a sport pilot or a recreational pilot. So when we are looking at the solo cross country, there's actually 2 more limitations. However, they're not true limitations because they could be lifted by endorsement. So they're not a true limitation. The limitations in 6189 can not be lifted. They are in concrete. They have to be done that particular way. So with this one, it actually can be lifted. So we have 2 here. Let's look at 2 limitations that student pilots would have before they actually go on their cross country. Well, it says that a student pilot cannot conduct a solo cross-country flight or any flight greater than 25 nautical miles from the airport where the flight originated. So this is 6193 Alpha 1 is specifically stating that a student pilot cannot fly any greater than 25 nautical miles away from the airport. Or a solo cross-country flight, which is in excess of 50 nautical miles. So we know they can't do that unless they do the training of 6193, but at a more lower limitation, they can't go beyond 25 nautical miles of the originating airport. The second is that they cannot make a solo flight and land at any other location other than the airport of origination. Okay, so when you are soloing someone, you have to tell them, say, look, when you're doing this flight, you can't go beyond 25 nautical miles, and you can't land at any other airport unless I give your permission. So these are 2 limitations that do apply to a student pilot, but they can be lifted by an endorsement. So if we keep on reading, it says here, except as provided in paragraph bravo, a student pilot who seeks solo cross-country flight privileges must have received flight training from an instructor authorized to provide the training and in the make and model, and have demonstrated proficiency on the appropriate maneuvers and procedures of the section to an authorized instructor. And then of course it says that they must also have their BACN endorsements from 6187. And lastly, comply with any limitations. Now, if we get into 6193, that's Alpha, and then we have Alpha 1 and 2, and then 3 says, a student pilot who seeks solo cross-country flight privileges must have received ground and flight training from an authorized instructor on the cross-country maneuvers and procedures listed in this section. Which means that instructors, when you are listening to this and you're trying to grow yourself professionally, if I look at your logbook of your student, and I look there and I see that there is no ground school listed for the cross-country maneuvers and procedures listed in 6193, then that person was not legal to do that stuff. So please make sure that you as the instructor, please make sure that you jot down every single time that you do any type of training with an applicant. whether it be ground or flight. You have to be able to do that. And if you sign someone off for solo or cross-country solo flight, you must have given them ground training on those maneuvers and procedures. I mean, it says it right there. So please make sure that you do that, so that way you'll be legal. That way, if your student happens to ball something up while they're flying, if they happen to bend some metal while they're flying, and the FAA comes and investigates, you better have your ducks in a row. Otherwise, they're going to hang you out to dry. So we talked about Alpha. Let's look at Bravo. So Bravo is basically going back up to Alpha and kind of releasing some of those limitations that we talked about. So it says authorization to perform certain solo flights and cross-country flights. The student pilot must obtain an endorsement from an authorized instructor to make solo flights from the airport where the student pilot normally receives training to any other location. And a student pilot who receives this endorsement must comply with the requirements of this paragraph. So if I give a person a 6193 Bravo 1 endorsement, what am I authorizing? Well, I'm authorizing them to make a solo flight to another airport, as long as it's within 25 miles of the airport where the student pilot normally receives training. But can I just give them that endorsement? And the answer is not. I have to do these things here from I to V. And so what are the things I have to do? Well, it says that the authorized instructor has given the student pilot flight training at the other airport. So that means you have to go back and forth. And it must cover things such as the training includes flight in both directions over the route, entering and exiting the traffic pattern, and takeoff and landings at the other airport. It also says that the authorized instructor who gave the training endorses the student pilot's logbook, so you must give an endorsement. And that they must also have their Bacon endorsement, part from 6187. And that the instructor thinks that the pilot is proficient, and that the purpose of the flight is to practice takeoff and landings at the other airport. So in your check ride, when you're talking about this with the examiner, and you get to the 6193 Bravo 1 endorsement, then you would say, well, for some reason at the airport I'm originating at, there's no, say there's a NOTAM today, and there's no pattern work that can be done. But they'll allow you to take off and land, but there's no pattern work. So you're going to send them to another airport that you may have been to before, or that you actually may be going to today, and actually to do the training in accordance with 6193 Bravo 1. And after you go to that airport and do the whole thing, which is of course flight direction and boat flight instruction in both directions over the route, entering and exiting the traffic pattern, and takeoff and landings at the other airport, then you can give them endorsements as long as you document the training. And of course, remember that the purpose of this flight is to practice takeoff and landings at that other airport. That's what the purpose of the flight is for. So then we have 6193 Bravo 2. And so Bravo 2 includes everything within this part here. So let's talk about this. It says repeated specific solo cross-country flights may be made to another airport that is within 50 nautical miles of the airport from which the flight originated. Now, some of you are saying right now, well, Todd, why is it using that terminology cross-country flight if it says that the airport is within 50 nautical miles? Okay, so if you've listened to my, I think it's regulations in part 1, we actually define the term cross-country. So cross-country is not necessarily in excess of 50 nautical miles. According to FAR 61.1, which is the definitions for part 61, cross-country has two different definitions. One is that any flight that involves you taking off and landing at another point in which you took off from. It could be 2 miles away, it could be 100 miles away. If you take off from one airport and you land at another airport, that's a cross-country flight. Now, on a note for that, if you are making steady flights back and forth that it's to an airport 10 miles away, is that considered cross-country flight? And the answer is yes. Can those flights that are less than 50 nautical miles go towards your pilot training requirement for the private or commercial or ATP or anything else? And the answer is absolutely not, because that is the two differences between cross-country, the definitions. So one is the one part is you can go to any other airport, boom, cross-country flight completed. And the second would be that you're actually trying to complete the requirement for flight training for a specific pilot certificate, like a private pilot certificate. So any flight you do under 50 is not considered cross country. It has to be 50 nautical miles or greater, straight line distance. Okay, so make sure you know those two definitions because that's very important. So in order for you to do this, it says that you can actually send someone for repeated specific cross-country flights. And why would you do this? Well, let's say, for instance, that I'm at one airport and that I have another, I have a student who's coming to me. He lives maybe 35 miles away, and there's another airport right next to his house. And he calls me up one day after doing extensive flight training with me. And he goes, "Hey, dude, I just bought an airplane." And I'm like, "Oh, dude, that is so awesome! You just bought an airplane." He goes, "Yes. Is it possible you can come over here and start working with me now, so I won't have to fly? I won't have to drive to you to do my flight training?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not driving 70 miles a day to go work with you. I don't even like you." Don't say that to their face, but you definitely would, say, "Look, there is something that I can do. What I can do is I can drive over there one day, and of course you have to pay me for my mileage over there and back because my time is very precious to me. And then I'll take off from your airport. We'll fly over to my airport, and I'll give you training in both directions. And then I'll go back. I've got to give you some little bit more instruction, like how to navigate and some other things, how to use a mag compass. And I'll go over that list with you in just a minute with exactly what you have to do with them. And then you can actually sign them off to go back and forth on these specific cross-country flights, i.e. less than 50, but still a cross-country flight. And I have to give you, of course, the ground training, and I have to endorse your logbook, and you have to have the bacon. And it says here that the student has a solo cross-country flight endorsement in accordance with paragraph C. So that's what I told you. I'm going to talk to you in a minute about exactly what you have to do in order to give this flight endorsement. You cannot just give them a 6193 Bravo 2 and that is it. That is not the way it works. So let's go down to Charlie and actually see what it says in Charlie. So Charlie says endorsements for solo cross-country flights, except as provided in Bravo 2, which is what we just got finished reading. A student pilot must have the endorsement prescribed in this paragraph for each cross-country flight. So again, if you didn't know what the word cross-country flight meant, this would be very confusing, but now since you know the definitions of cross-country flight and the two different times that we would actually use that terminology, it's not that bad. And a student pilot must have a solo cross-country endorsement from an authorized instructor who conducted the training and placed in that person's logbook for a specific category. And number 2 says the exact same thing except it's for make and model. So Charlie 1 is for category, and Charlie 2 is for make and model. Now, the thing about 6193 Charlie is that it very closely resembles 6187 Charlie. So this is merely an endorsement that says that you've done training. Well, the question is, what training? What training do I have to do? Well, let's go back. We're actually going to go see what training we have to do, and we're going to come back to Charlie 2 and 3, 1, 2, and 3. So let's scroll down just a little bit so that way you can see what training do I have to do. Well, if you're listening to this video and you are a CFI for single engine, then you would have to go to 6193 Echo. And then we go, of course, to Echo, and it says, Echo reads, maneuvers and procedures for solo cross-country flight training in a single engine airplane. So everything that is in this list here for the single engine training, you would have to do before you give them that Bravo 2 endorsement. Now, I hope I just didn't confuse you. So let's make sure we understand this. So this is all the training you have to do in a single engine. And if I go back up to, I'll slow down just a little bit because I may be going a little bit too fast. Remember that Bravo 2 was repeated specific solo cross-country flights to an airport within 50 nautical miles? Okay. And I told you that you had to do the training to and fro the airport, but you also had to do the training in accordance with paragraph Charlie. And of course, if we go down to Charlie, it says that you've trained them in accordance with this part. And the training in accordance with this part is paragraph E paragraph echo, and that's only if you're going to do a single engine. Now, I know some of you right now are going, what in the hell are you talking about? But, you know, I don't know why they make it this complicated, folks. I really don't. But if you don't get it the first time, just listen to the video again. Or if you still don't get it, post some comments down below, and I'm really good at answering these comments pretty fast. And so I'm here to help you. I can be your mentor through this whole entire thing, but you have to ask the questions. Otherwise, there's no way for me to assess and know that you actually understand what I'm talking about. So the Echo was specifically reserved for those that are flying the single engine. But what if you're not? What if you're actually soloing someone in a multi-engine? Well, that's no problem. We just go from E down to F. And of course, F is for maneuvers and procedures in a multi-engine. Well, what if you're listening to this video and you're like, hey Todd, I'm not even an airplane CFI. I'm a freaking helicopter CFI. Well, first, that's unsafe. Don't do that. Okay, don't ever do that. That's very unsafe. But seriously, if you did, you just go down to golf, and golf is for maneuvers and procedures for solo cross-country flight in a helicopter. And it just keeps going on and on and on and on. It goes through gyroplane. It goes through all the rest of them, all the other different categories of aircraft, power lift. So it goes through all the rest of them. So there's really nothing else in 6193 that we have to worry about all the way to the end. So we have to go back up now to make sure that we comply with everything in Charlie. And let's see if we are complying with everything in Charlie. So remember I told you Charlie 1 was specific category, and Charlie 2 was specific make and model. So if I want to give someone that repeated solo cross-country endorsement to go back and forth from their airport in accordance with 6193 Bravo 2, then I actually have to go down and give them the endorsement for Charlie 1 and 2, because that's what it says in Bravo 2. As I must have done the training in accordance with paragraph, or I must have an endorsement in accordance with paragraph C, and paragraph C says I've got to do the training in accordance with a specific category. In our particular case, if you're doing single engine training, it's paragraph E. If you're doing multi-engine training, it's paragraph F. Rotary is golf, and so on and so on and so on. Okay. And then to finish up the Bravo 2, it says that for repeated solo cross-country flights to another airport within 50 nautical miles from which the flight originated, separate endorsements are not required to be made for each flight. Well, what does that mean? Well, we have to finish up Charlie now, and we have to do that with actually tying in this Bravo 2-4, tying that in with Charlie 3, where Charlie 3 says, for each cross-country flight, the authorized instructor who reviews the cross-country planning must make an endorsement in the person's logbook after reviewing that person's cross-country planning as specified in paragraph Delta of this section. And the endorsement must include the specific make and model, state the student's pre-flight planning and preparation is correct, and that student is prepared to make this flight safely under the known conditions, and state any limitations required by the student's authorized instructor. This endorsement can be found in the Advisory Circular 6165. Whichever the current edition is, I'm not putting a letter on the end of it because I don't know how long this video is going to be up on the internet. So it may change. It's changed like 5 times since I've been a CFI. It's probably going to change again. Anyway, so that gets us through 6193. The last thing we talk about is what instructor can actually give this endorsement. Well, the only instructor that can give this endorsement, the ones that are actually permitted to give those, is any instructor. If you're a flight instructor in general, it doesn't matter. Any flight instructor can give, well, you have to be for that specific category. You can't be a helicopter pilot, can't authorize a person to solo an airplane, okay, and vice versa. So, what do you have to do to give this endorsement? Well, it says that you can't give the endorsement unless you determine that the student's cross-country planning is correct. So do you have to look at the student's cross-country planning? Yes. Do you have to review the current and forecast weather conditions? Yes. Do you have to determine that the flight can be completed under a VFR? Yes. Do you have to determine that the student is proficient to make the flight safely? The answer again is yes. And have you determined that the student has the appropriate solo cross-country endorsement for the make and model of the aircraft to be flown? And that they're actually that the endorsement is current. And the answer is yes. If the answer to all those are yes, then yes, give the endorsement. But anybody, you could have somebody walk in your school And as long as they meet all the requirements of 4 and 5, they have the endorsement to solo. You can actually do 1 through 3 and allow them to and give them an endorsement to make a solo cross-country flight. Now, I wouldn't recommend that. I would not. If somebody walks off the street, I would not recommend you just giving somebody an endorsement if you didn't know them. But is it legal? And the answer is yes. Is it the most safest thing in the world? The answer is no. And that's it with 6193. Any questions on that, just make sure you post them down in the comments below. And we're going to end. I'm going to scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. Of course, I've got to go through all these different categories in 6193. And we don't care about 6194 because none of these videos are about student pilots seeking a sport pilot or recreational. We have very specific videos only for recreational, and I never talk about sport, mainly because I'm not a sport pilot instructor as well. So we will go back and have specific videos for recreational, but not anytime soon. And then, of course, the last thing we're going to talk about today is 6195. So if your student's soloing and they want to go through Class Bravo airspace, can that be allowed? And the answer is absolutely not. If a person doesn't hold a private pilot certificate, they cannot go through the Class Bravo airspace. However, you can endorse them to go through, but what must you do? Well, let's look at 6195 and find out, and then we'll close this video out for today. A student pilot may not operate an aircraft on a solo flight in Class Bravo unless that student pilot has received both ground and flight training. Don't leave out the ground. I see endorsements endorsing the Class Bravo endorsement, but I'm like, where is the ground training? And they say, well, was never given ground training. I go, well, your flight through the Bravo wasn't legal because you weren't in accordance with the regs. So read the regs, young instructors. Read the regs, because the FAA does not care that you have not read the regs. Okay, when they violate you, it's going to be brutal, and it's going to be because you didn't know, and they don't accept the fact that you didn't know. So trust me on this. I have true experience with telling you that they don't care that you don't know. And your interpretation of the reg means nothing to the FAA. And that is bona fide 100% correct. And the flight training was received in that specific Class Bravo. So if you're going to solo through Atlanta, you have to have an endorsement for Atlanta. If you're going to solo through Charlotte, then you have to have an endorsement for Charlotte. You're going to go through the Miami airspace, and you got to have an endorsement for Miami. So one Class Bravo endorsement will not suffice for all Class Bravo airspaces. And understand that this endorsement, it's only good for 90 days. So preceding the day of the flight. So once the endorsement has been given, you can wait. You have 90 days to make the flight through the Bravo. The 3 here says that the logbook endorsement specifies that the student pilots received the required ground and flight training. So even in the endorsement, you're stating that you gave the ground and the flight. So please make sure that you log that ground training in accordance with 61.189. We're going to cover that one in a couple of videos. But 61.189 specifically says that if you give ground or if you give flight, you have to sign the logbook. It is not an option. So 6195 Alpha is if you're going to go through the airspace. But what about Bravo? Bravo says a student pilot may not operate an aircraft on a solo flight to, from, or at an airport located within Class Bravo, pursuant to 91.131 Bravo. 91.131 Bravo is the regulation in Part 91 which covers Class Bravo airspace, and specifically Bravo covers the entry, which in 91.31 Bravo, which states that a student pilot can't go in there. It's one of the stipulations. The student pilot has received both ground and flight from an authorized instructor to provide training to operate at that airport, and the flight and ground has been received at that specific airport for which the solo flight is authorized. So if you want to send a student solo to a Class Bravo airport, you have to give them a 6193 Bravo endorsement to do that. Okay. And then, of course, second verse, same as the first, it's only good for 90 days, and you have to have that endorsement specifying that you've received the required ground and flight training. Again, here, we don't really care about this for the sport pilot and recreational, because this section does not apply to those people. Okay. And so that is 6195, and that covers it for today's lesson in regulations. This is Part 5, 6193 through 6195, and it only covers cross-country endorsements and operation into Class Bravo airspace. Well, I hope you learned something today, and keep it up. Part 6 right around the corner, in which we're going to get right into the low 100s, 61101 and up to 61113, I believe. And that's going to cover the actual endorsements that you have to send someone for a private pilot check ride. Todd Shelnut here with CFI Pro. Thank you so much for listening today. Please make sure you subscribe, like, and share. And we'll see you on the next go. Thanks. You guys have a great week.